Little House on the Prairie like I thought it was going to be. Um, I also think this metaphor breaks down when it comes to viewing the teacher, because, you know, in Little House Prairie Land, the teacher went off to her log cabin and opened it for the day and taught the students. And then when that was over, then she closed it back up and then she went off and did her domestic responsibilities. But in my house, and I'm sure in your house as well, I'm multitasking all day long. I've got my laundry, you know, a couple of loads running at one point. I've got my Instapot making dinner. You know, I'm famous for during spelling tests, also working on Pinterest ideas for co-op. I'm juggling a lot of things at the same time. And so that's kind of the metaphor that I'm going to try to work off today, is kind of the juggling. We are juggling a lot of responsibilities and balancing that. And actually, I see Carol Federoff here listening in, and she has a blog that I love that's called The Many Hats of Orthodox Moms. And so that's kind of what I'm working off today, is kind of how do we keep all those hats in the air? Because we know that as soon as one of those hats drops, then we bend over because we really care about that hat. And as we go pick that up and figure out why it dropped, 3 more drop. And pretty soon the whole pile's on the floor. And if you're anything like me, I'm either very cranky at that point or I'm really emotional. And at that point, then all the peace and order that I'm trying to create in my family has just fallen apart. So we're going to talk about today how that we can kind of keep those hats up in a mindful way and in a peaceful way, because that's our responsibility and our gift that we give our family. And that's not to put pressure on you, that's actually to put priority on you. So the first place that we're going to start in kind of managing all of this is to start with mom. And I really want us to consider a couple of things. Obviously, when people come to you and they say, you know, I don't know how you do it all, or I could never do what you do, I like to respond with, yeah, I can't do it either. I do it by God's grace. I have to start with getting the strength from Him. And so that's why I put number 1 on this little slide, prayer. Having a prayer role that is realistic for your season that you're in. You know, I find when I'm have a new little nursing little baby, I can do a little bit more book study or reading some more spiritual books because I have uninterrupted times sitting on my couch. But I'm now in a stage of my life that I really like to do my prayer time in the morning, and I have a whack-a-mole toddler who could wake up at any point. So I don't know, you know, how long I actually have. So my prayer time needs to be pretty succinct, and it needs to be something that can either easily be interrupted or something that I can do with like kind of somebody hanging all over me while I'm doing it. So being mindful of your season that you're in. And I really encourage you to really be honest with your spiritual father as you're kind of working through finding the right rhythm for the right season that you're in. A good example I can give is, you know, last summer, I have older children who work at the strawberry patch and they have to be there at 6:30. So my morning prayer time was going to be a little bit challenging. I also found that was the best time for me to take my run because it wasn't hot and I had people who were still sleeping. But then I felt like I was wrongly ordering my day because I really couldn't get to prayer time at another time. And so I brought that to my priest and he just recommended, well, why don't you do it at night? You know, maybe you'll be more thankful. You can spend some more time in gratitude. And I thought, oh, yeah, that's a great idea, until I actually tried it. And then I found that my teenagers like to talk to me at night. And so they were my new whack-a-mole that I had to deal with. And so the honest truth is that I never really worked out a good system. We went back to school and I'm back to my morning time and it's fine. But in a few weeks, God willing, I'm going to have that conversation again. Please help me find the right balance. So really being mindful about your prayer time and making that the first thing that you think about when you're organizing for your family, leaning on His strength rather than your own is really the key to really everything. The second thing I would really urge you to consider before you consider anything else is self-care. You know, we are the nurturers of our family, and we, you know, be honest, you're the last one in the car on the way to church. You're the last one to sit down at the table at dinner. It's our role to constantly give. And we hear it all the time ad nauseum, like you can't take care of others if you haven't taken care of yourself. But it really is true. And so I would really encourage you to make that a priority. And in doing so and making it a priority, number one, it teaches your family to take care of you too. And if you do not love yourself and care for yourself enough, they won't either. I always thought, oh, if I just be so self-giving to my children, then they will just see that and they will want to be that way too. No, it doesn't work that way. It actually teaches them to be selfish and take you for granted. So letting them know that you are going to set aside that time really is a healthy thing to teach them, because someday they're either going to be husbands and wives needing to encourage also in that way. Another reason that priority is important is because if you don't do that, it won't happen. You'll keep pushing it off. I'll get to it. I'll do it. And you don't get there. So making sure that that is set in your day will making sure it actually gets done. And the last piece of that is also just that in making a priority, then it gives you, okay, go ahead. Then it gives you the room to, when you are feeling stressed, you're not trying to squeeze in that self-care in inefficient ways that are going to make hats drop. So, for instance, I used to think self-care was sewing for me because it's a hobby I really love, but I found that I kind of squeezed it in at inappropriate times. And then what happened was I looked up and realized, oh my gosh, I haven't gotten dinner ready and now it's 5:30 and now a hat dropped. Or I came out of my sewing room and the entire house was in disarray and now a hat dropped. So when I know that I have a set aside time for self-care, I'm not trying to squeeze it in. I'm not trying to squeeze 5 minutes on Facebook because I'm feeling stressed out. I know that that's coming and I can be more restful the rest of the time. So let's look for just a second about what self-care actually is. So self-care is not date night. Self-care is not, your homeschool support group. Self-care is not paying a teenager to come watch your kids so you can clean your house. Those are all wonderful things, but that's not a phrase that was once given to me by someone at the homeschool conference was life-giving. Self-care should be life-giving. Those are all fun things to do, but not necessarily life-giving. So I actually learned this because I'm a very slow learner. Just last year, I've been a mom for 21 years, and I finally was in an exercise class that somebody had invited me to, and halfway through it, I went, oh, this is self-care. I think this is what it actually is. And what I realized that some of the principles that I myself look for in self-care is, number one, nothing is asked of me, because everywhere else I go, whether it's church or co-op or in my home or with friends or family, I've got to bring a side dish. I've got to have a lesson plan. I have to have something. But when I come to my exercise class, nothing is expected of me. I don't even have to pay for it. Actually, I don't even have to bring a water bottle. There's a sweet lady who makes sure we have water bottles. I feel nurtured and that feels good. The second part of it is it's a set time. Thursday at 5:30. I can't push it off. I can't say, oh, I'll get to it later. I have to be there or I don't get to do it. And the last thing that I really love about it is it's done. It's an hour. So when I'm done, my caloric personality just loves it. I accomplished it. Yay, I got that in, and that feels good to me. So those may not be the things that you need for self-care, but those are just things that for my own personality bless me and help me refocus and get ready to serve again in my family. Being mindful of how much self-care you actually need. For me, if I know I've got that Thursday thing, that helps me. I'm pretty good. But I have a friend, she does self-care every day from 12:30 to 1. She takes a walk. Her kids clean up for lunch, and that is her time. Sometimes she reads, she listens to podcasts. Sometimes she calls a friend. Sometimes she prays. Sometimes she's just quiet. But she knows every day that that's her time. So that's something communicating with your husband about, of how to, again, different stages of your life, how you can weave that in. I know when I had younger children and they actually all took naps, I didn't do chores during that time. I made sure that that was the time I did something that I enjoyed. So keeping self-care in mind. Another prioritizing for us is to be honest about our strengths and our weaknesses, and not to feel bad about that, but rather to embrace it, recognizing that God made you. He knows your strengths, he knows your weaknesses, and he matched your family and your children perfectly to those strengths and weaknesses. So we don't have to apologize for that we're not good at something. We can work with that. A good friend of mine isn't a crafty person. She has a gaggle of boys and just a couple girls. She just admits it. Like, I'm not good at crafts. It's just not something that I am going to regularly do in my home. That's not an excuse not to do it. It's just that she looks for other avenues, other people who can kind of support her in it, rather than trying to be something that she's not. My personal example is that foreign language is just not my gift, and technology really is not my gift. So, our online, Spanish program is just not something that I should be in charge of. I mean, if I do it, it's going to take so much energy, and I'm probably going to fail at it regularly. So that's something I've actually passed on to my husband. He took French, so it really doesn't make a lot of sense, but it works for us. And that's me being able to say, that's just not something that I can offer our family well. There are, I'm sure, 1,000 other things we can think of to prioritize mom and make her important, but those were kind of the main things that I kind of thought of. And then kind of moving on to, once we've got mom strong and she's able to balance these hats better, then kind of looking at, well, let's look at how can we manage the hats better. So the first kind of area of thinking about that is in planning. How can we be in control of our hats? Well, we kind of just need to be mindful of that and have things set in advance for how we're going to do that. So I kind of look at it in 3 terms, like global, meaning like kind of looking at your yearly schedule, then kind of looking like kind of thinking Charlotte Mason, like how you chunk up your school year in like terms or whatever, and then weekly. So when I look at my beginning of my school year, one of the things that I really have to try to be for myself mindful of is to not to maybe overplan is a good way, to put a limit on my planning when I'm looking at globally. Otherwise, it can be very overwhelming. And I have actually been very guilty of spending an entire summer with my face glued to Pinterest, trying to find the perfect ideas or find the perfect curriculum. So I kind of, over the years, have kind of learned about myself that I need to kind of put a limit on how much time I'm actually going to spend on that. One of my favorite things to do is in the summer is to send my kids away for a day with my mom. They love Grammy time, and I can just pour my focus into that and not get interrupted and then have to try to refocus to where I was. Usually what I do is I start out with an akathis to the Mother of God, Nurture of Children. And then I pray really kind of specifically about my children and ask God to kind of show me what I need to focus on in that year. And then I spend the day kind of chunking it out and planning, kind of trusting that God's going to fill in the cracks, kind of trusting that whatever I didn't get done that day, it just wasn't supposed to get done. And that's not to say that I don't like spend a whole another day organizing our schoolroom. There's a whole nother day, obviously, for organizing, our ordering all the materials. So that's not to say it gets done in one day. That wouldn't be realistic. But just the planning part of it, just having a limit to what I'm actually going to do and how I'm going to get that done. When I look at global, I really like to start first with the liturgical year. I actually always start with Holy Week and just kind of fine tune my year based on that. And again, those are things that as your family grows and changes, you fine tune and make different. But one of the things that I've come to learn for ourselves is that we just have services during Holy Week for the first 3 days in the evening. So we actually do school the first 3 days. I can actually weave in, some of the hymns and things that I want to talk about or themes that are going to be coming up in church, using that for copy work or, read aloud or whatever. But then, the rest of the week, obviously we're busy and at church and we just can't do school. But then I use so we just do kind of a wraparound week. So then the first 3 weeks or first 3 days rather of Bright Week, we're off because we're usually in a food coma. We're usually pretty exhausted. It's just not a good time for us to try to do school. So that's kind of one of those little fine tuning things that I make our week off, our little spring break work for us. Same for, at a time in our life, we had 2 brothers getting married one spring. Well, I took the weeks off before the weddings because I knew that I had another hat in the air that I had to control, and I needed to take that school hat and take it off because everything was going to drop if I didn't do that. So we each year can fine tune our schedule based on what's actually happening in our life and make it work for us. When I plan, one of my favorite things to use, I know this came up in the talk of the 101 homeschooling yesterday. One of my favorite things to use is OneNote, and I picked that up from the homeschool conference years ago. And again, I'm not a technical person, so if I can figure it out, anybody can. And if you look at my OneNote, it's a complete disaster. My husband just shudders when he looks at it, but it's kind of my place where I brain dump. I have a, each year I make my little notebook, I think they call them, and each folder is one of my hats. So that way it helps me manage. I cannot think about all my hats at all the time, but if I have a place to put that information until I need it, it helps me relax. And so, I have a folder for, say, Christmas, and I have a spreadsheet for my kids, so I know who's getting what. I have an idea sheet, so in September when somebody says, oh, I really like this book, I can put that down as an idea. I have a spreadsheet for extracurricular activities. I have a spreadsheet for each of the subjects in school. So when I see on Pinterest a cute art activity, I can plug it right in there, and I've saved it, and I don't have to keep thinking about that all the time. So OneNote has just been a godsend for me, just to kind of balance. I have it for meal planning, pretty much anything I have to manage. There's, a folder for that. And that gives me rest. It helps me feel more peaceful about everything that I have to do. I guess the only other thing I would say with my global planning, and I guess it fits even more into terms, I also use, and I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but I also have a paper planner. So I use OneNote to keep everything, organized for a broad sense. But then my paper planner is where I kind of, at each term, I take everything and I transfer it. And that may sound kind of redundant, but for me, what it helps me do is I can think about things in 4 or 6 week chunks, but the whole year feels too overwhelming. So by taking the time to transfer that, it helps me kind of refocus on what I really have to do just before me. It also helps me to kind of check for conflicts. So as I'm plugging in my calendar and I'm like, oh, we were going to go to some, say a symphony concert, and then I realize, oh, that's actually the Feast of the, Ascension. We're going to be in church. Like, that's not going to work. I can catch those things in advance, so I'm not bamboozled and dropping hats at some point. So, the paper planner is just kind of a place, and it's also a place where my whole family can click on it and open it up and say, oh, this is what's going on. When I plan for terms, I usually try to do, I chunk our year, not necessarily in 6 week chunks. It just depends. It might be 4 weeks, it might be 6 weeks. This year I tried 10. I'm never doing that again. It was just one long chunk in the winter. Really bad idea. We had to do it, but I wouldn't do that again. So I try to, have my chunks based on what our family needs during that year. And the same thing, like, not every term looks the same. We started in August. It was summer. Like, we did math 3 days a week. We didn't do any science. We were busy doing nature study. Like, that was the focus for that time. When we got to, December, our focus was really light because we're getting ready for Christmas and there was lots of other things to do. We got to January, we're not really going anywhere. Math was 5 days a week. There was no nature study because I'm just too much of a pansy to go outside in the winter. We did a lot more science. So, making those terms work for me. I also, in between each term, I take a break. And again, it just depends. Sometimes it's 2 weeks, sometimes it's 1 week. But in that week, I take just a couple of hours to transfer my information from OneNote to my planner, and then also just to kind of reevaluate. This kid needs me to be a little more focused on their language arts because they're slipping through the cracks, or the time of day that I'm doing geography just doesn't work. I need to switch that around. So each of those terms is kind of a chance for me to recalibrate and get things back to a better way. The other thing that I use breaks for is that's my time to kind of look at what materials we might be needing, such as books. Our library system's kind of poor, so I have to interlibrary loan a lot. So I use that time to get my books, get my crafts that I may need. You know, if we need plaster of Paris or something, that's the time I make sure I get those things, so that's not interrupting our regular week. Weekly schedule, I really don't like structure, and I finally admit that about myself. I can plan to say I'm going to have a weekly like lesson planning time, but I won't do it. I'll avoid it every time. So instead, what I do is we just do kind of a quick family meeting. And honestly, we do it in the car very often on the way to church. We have a 30 to 40-minute drive. And so I bring my little, you know, paper planner with me, and we just kind of say, here's what's going on this week. Did I miss anything, you know, that anybody else knows about? That's actually the time we do our meal planning. I just say, hey, who's hungry for what? And at the top of Monday, I'll write what lunch is. At the bottom of Monday, I write what dinner is. And then our pattern is just to hit the grocery store on the way home from church, because that's Aldi's is right by church and it's not by our house. So, you know, it's a very quick little thing for us. One of the tricks that I learned at the homeschool conference a few years ago is in prepping, try to prep a week in advance. So for instance, like right now, my boys and I, we do an IEW class for language arts. When I need to make copies for that, I make the copies for the next week. So when we're having our class, I directly hand them their sheets, and then I go to the copier. That just works, you know, because that way, another way that I don't get behind is kind of what I do with that. So planning is really important. Another area is that moms can kind of help keep our hats up is in managing. Consider yourself a manager. Promote yourself. Like, you literally cannot do all the things. You can't be the cleaner, the cooker, you can't do it all. So promote yourself. A good friend of mine says that all the time. Promote yourself out of your job. Constantly be doing that. It feels wrong to us. I feel bad when I say to my kids, make dinner, when I'm like, I feel like that's my job, but I'm teaching them to have that job as they grow to be adults. So don't be afraid to find ways to pass off your work, basically. One of the areas, you know, I kind of put up on this little screen, 3 areas that I look to that I have to manage. And chores obviously is a really big one, especially with a family as big as mine. Our house gets really messy really, really fast. So when I'm managing chores, I try to consider seasons. Obviously, different chore, you know, we have to mop our floor every day pretty much in the summer because everyone's in and out all the time, but not as big of a deal in the winter. Or, you know, during Lent, clean out the car that's a real job, because we're in our car, in and out, going to church a lot. We're eating in the car sometimes, things get messy. Whereas, you know, right now during coronavirus, I have not had anyone clean up the car yet. We aren't in our car ever. So, you know, just kind of being aware of your seasons and how your patterns of your family are changing at different times. Different jobs might look different. It's I think everybody knows about just kind of finding tidy times. We do our tidy times before dinner. Usually it's kind of when my husband calls me and says, I'm on my way home from work. That's kind of, I give the kids the thumbs up, and they know, everybody tidy up. I want dad to come home to a peaceful home, you know, and then the same thing, you know, for bed. And I say all this with a huge caveat to say, you know, we do our evening prayers usually at 8:30. I cannot tell you how many times at 8:35 we're stumbling to the icon corner and we did not clean our house, and we look at it and say, oh, we'll just do it in the morning. So like, these are best practices that I need to remember to do as well. So if in any way this is making me sound like we have it all figured out, we really don't. So these are just ideas that I wish I did better, honestly. I did want to share with you one of my new tricks that we've done in the past 2 years for chores that, especially in a large family, is really helpful. And it's helpful to turn chores into you being a manager instead of you doing all of it. We actually shifted our chore time to lunchtime now. And one of that's is so that we don't have the excuse of we can't vacuum because somebody's sleeping at nap time, or we can't put laundry away because we can't go in the room because somebody's studying. Everybody does chores at lunchtime. And what I do, rather than assigning jobs, I have this little whiteboard, I don't know if you can see it, but I just write what I see that needs to be done during the day. And so it's it's an incentive for people to kind of keep things tidied. But also it's kind of a way for us to be able to, like I put on here, to recruit your kids to start to identify the jobs. In my perfect world, I'm going to have this out at lunchtime, and I'm going to say, okay, what does everybody see that needs to be done here? But so far we've done that, I think, twice in 2 years. Mostly it's just me nagging and saying, this is what needs to be done. But I don't know if you can see it, but I just assign points based on like how long it will take to do the jobs. Sometimes our list is really long and sometimes it's really short. And that's kind of the incentive. Like on here, I have laundry room, dining room, tidy. Well, and I will nag and I will say, like, that's actually something we shouldn't have to do, guys, but we do because you didn't put your stuff away. And so I just basically divide up the points and say, well, everybody's got to do 20 points today, or everybody has to do 30 points, just depending on how much work is there. And then I kind of just guess a number, and whoever's closest gets to pick first, and so on and so forth. And that way everybody knows how to do pretty much every job. And hopefully we're learning that it's all our responsibility together to take care of our house. I should say that I do clean with them. I think that is kind of, there's a difference between kid clean and mom clean. So that way I kind of get to rotate through at least couple of weeks. I'm giving the bathroom a deep clean, or I'm, or reorganizing the towel shelf or whatever. So kind of as me doing it with them, they get to see how I want it to look, and they get to, I get to kind of quality control it, so to speak. How do I manage school? Obviously, that's kind of like the whole point of most of this talk, I guess. But one of the things, and I know Korea, Elizabeth, it sounds like we had a lot of similar ways of managing things. I feel like the more that we can stay together, the better. And I think, obviously in homeschooling, we want that. We want to grow as a family. So that's a good thing. So our history and our art and our read aloud, as much as we can, we stick together. But also respecting that within those learning together, there will be individual levels. Your younger kid's going to write a sentence, your older child's going to write a paragraph, and so on and so forth. But there is a real blessing as we learn together. When I can't do that, I haven't figured out how to do that in math, obviously, but we do math at the same time. And so that is kind of a blessing in that, if somebody gets stuck, they don't always have to come to me. They can lean over to their sibling and be like, hey, how do you divide fractions? Or, it just kind of develops a community attitude as much as we can. And I've even used that in times when I'm kind of overwhelmed. I'll even have older kids check younger kids' work kind of down the line. I wouldn't do that like days in a row, but as a quick, I got to get this done, we can kind of encourage each other. And I kind of love, because the older kids tend to be bossier than I would be. And that 5 isn't very neat, or you need to go back and redo that. You didn't get that right. I probably would have let it slide. So it is kind of interesting to watch siblings be mentors. Another area that I like to do is I like to group similar stages together. Language arts is a great time to do that. We can be writing at different stages, but then we can kind of come together. And I love to do writing sharing. So we kind of critique each other's work. What did you like about what they wrote? What do you think they could improve? And it's kind of a family joke now for us. Probably about 5 years ago, one of my kids would always say it could be a little bit longer. And so now there isn't a writing sharing in the Ghareeb family without hearing it could be a little longer, even when it doesn't even make sense. So again, it's a way that we're building community as in a family identity, which is good. An important way that I manage our school with multiple children all at different levels is morning meeting. And morning meeting is not at all like structured or really important. It's just me kind of gathering people by their similar ages and just saying, okay, today make sure you've got your math done. Remember, we've got your language arts, powwow tomorrow. Make sure that's ready, and make sure you've got your Spanish, yada, yada, go. Like just 2 or 3 minutes, just kind of letting them know what I'm expecting out of that day and sending them off to do it. And we'll talk a little bit more about why I do that in just a minute. One other way that I manage, or one other thing I have to manage, we all have to manage, is meal planning. And again, planning and shopping are, you know, having a plan for how you're going to plan and having a plan of how you're going to shop and having that kind of a regular part of your routine is really important. Like I said, we do our shopping on the way home from church on Sundays, and that because we're right by the store, it makes sense. Otherwise, I'd have to drive a half an hour out of my way to do that. Another thing with meal planning is I try to include my children as part of that. Again, trying to learn to pass off that job to them. So right now, how we do it is each day of the week, one of my kids has a day that they cook. So on Thursday, because I have my exercise class, that is one of my kids who I can literally just look at him and say, make enchiladas, and he can make it happen. And I don't have to have any part in that. And it's a great life lesson because a couple of weeks ago, he put cinnamon in it instead of cumin by accident, and we all had to eat it. And it was kind of like what Andrew Kern was saying about taking care of the dog. It was like a really good, you know, responsibility moment of like, I got to get this right or the whole family is really not happy. And, you know, of course we were charitable and we ate it, but nobody really loved it. But I also, you know, like on Wednesdays, one of my younger children is my cooking partner. And like I teach, we're doing, you know, it's because it's fasting, they're simple meals. So, you know, she can make spaghetti now pretty simply. It's lots of cutting vegetables. It's time that we can spend together. But in a pinch, I can look at her and say, make spaghetti, and she can make that happen. So that's something where they feel some ownership, and it certainly helps me. In all of this, balance is really important. What I try to do is I try to have my littles are my focus in the day first. Because if I don't, they can very easily get shuffled off because other things become more important. And also, if I don't make them first, what I find is that they're going to need me in different ways that are maybe not helpful. So like I said, I have my little morning meeting and I send everybody off, and that's my time with the little people. We read. Sometimes it's structured and we actually do, you know, preschool, we do a little calendar time and, you know, or we do some book and a craft. Sometimes I just follow their lead and we play Play-Doh or I build blocks with them, but I give them my focus time first when they're freshest and I'm freshest. And right now how our day is balanced is then we move to morning time and our whole family comes together. And honestly, truth telling, that is much to the chagrin of my high schoolers. They absolutely hate being pulled out of their little, you know, learning layers and to have to come back and do, you know, morning time with me. But sometimes you have to work with what works for the whole team. So that's kind of what we do. But we do morning time all together, and that's kind of our time of, you know, we do a read aloud. We usually do something spiritual, like, you know, we just finished tending to the heart of the garden, something like that. And then they go off on their merry way. And that's when I spend some time in my, you know, groups of kids that are kind of similar skills, similar ages. But if I've invested in my littles in that point, they're more likely to go off and play peacefully and not interrupt and to feel like they've had what they needed from me. The last thing in balance, well, I guess I could say a little bit more about my independent versus learning together. So like I said, we start out our morning, the kids know to go do their independent work. Then we move to our morning time, which is a learning time. Then we move to a time of kind of some group learning. I try to rotate through that. So I don't just say all morning long, do your independent work, and then I'll meet with you, or I'll meet with you first in the day, and then I send you off for the day to do your work. I try to balance that. So there's, you know, I can give them little snippets of time when you have to work independently, but if I give them too long, that's overwhelming for them, or if the list is too long, that's overwhelming for them. And me just checking in at little periods of time helps them be accountable and helps them just kind of stay on track. Along balance, I also put on their joy, making sure that you balance joy, because when you're managing a lot of things and you're trying to be efficient, sometimes the easiest thing to give up is the fun part, right? And so, you know, I do try to plan for what we call just because days. Like last summer, you know, it was really, really hot and we had just started school, and I looked at the kids and I said, you know what, it's just too hot to homeschool. And their eyes got so excited because they thought, well, that just means we're not having school. And I was like, instead, we're going to have lake school. And we you know, have a little lake that we belong to that we swim at. And so we packed up our school stuff and we went and we did it at the lake. And I'm going to tell you, they got their schoolwork done so fast sitting by the lake at the picnic table, and they actually did it really well. And then we spent the day swimming, and it was really fun. So that was a just because day that I had in my head in advance and was at the ready to do it when the right moment hit. So, another one was this winter. My little people were really interested in polar bears and whatever. I waited for just the right day when the weather was cooperative with we could walk at the zoo and not be totally miserable. And then I just kind of in the morning said, you know what? Let's just go to the zoo. And I often will say to them, like, why are we going to do this? And they always go, because we can. And that just means because we're homeschoolers. It's like a way that we celebrate that. So trying to balance those within your term, like being mindful of what you're going to do and just pull it out at the moment that it works. But also I try to balance fun within my week. A couple of years ago, I was burnt out. I was struggling with, why am I even doing this anyway? And so I balanced that year. We have kind of had our fun day on Wednesdays. We had art and we had our tea party, and I don't even remember now, but it was a day that I actually looked forward to. For me, I looked forward to it. And I planned that right on Wednesday. So I only had to do a little rough before I could get to something fun. And by me feeling that joy, that set the tone for everybody else. So looking for ways to find that kind of balance. And really, at the end, I just wanted to share, I'm sharing a lot of ideas. And again, like I said, the truth tell is, I need to reflect on these things just as much as anybody else. Like it sounds, so organized, but our house is very disorganized. And we don't do, this is all best practice. We don't do this all the time. If this is just when what I know works, and I have to be disciplined to do that and make it work. But recognizing that, when I was a newbie beginning homeschool mom, I had, if somebody would have told me that I was going to have 8 children, I would have fallen over in disbelief. If somebody would have told me that I would have to make 3 hot meals from scratch every day, I would have been weeping in the corner because I didn't know how to cook at all. My poor husband had to eat terrible things when we first got married. And, we evolve as mothers, as our family grows, as our children need different things from us. God gives us what we need. And so that's kind of put that up at the end there, that God gives us a new hat, but he gives us the grace to do it. So, just really trusting on that. I know that I am guilty of looking ahead too far and going, what am I going to do when these kids get older? Or what am I going to do about college when they're, in 7th grade or whatever? Just trusting that God will give you the grace. And if you're not feeling that grace, then really evaluating, do I need to do that hat? It kind of goes back to, with making mom priority and keeping limits. Sometimes I take on too much and I have to be free to say, you know what, that's a hat that I really shouldn't take on right now. And being able to put that down and just saying, maybe there's another time in life that hat will work out better for me. So just kind of trusting that and knowing that he really will fill in the cracks. So that's really all that I have to share today. I don't know if there are questions. I didn't pay attention to these chats because I was afraid that I wouldn't know what I was doing. And so with all the other things I was doing. So I don't know if I know if there somebody was managing that. So I'm just
Yes.
going to.
Thank you, Vicki. So we have one question here so far. How do you deal with record keeping of kids' work? I have only 3 kids, but have found it difficult to keep their work organized and portfolios up to date for our state regulations for review in Florida.
Okay. I have to say I'm very spoiled because I live in Michigan, and in Michigan we have absolutely no right. Well, I shouldn't say we don't have any regulation. We do, but we have no requirements asked of us. So any record keeping that I do for myself and just to make myself feel better. And my neighbor down the street laughs at me because she's like, why do you even worry about that? But what I do is I have banker's boxes actually under my bed for each kid. And so I just kind of save, and I have kind of a folder for like each for each grade. And I just save noteworthy things that I think we want to save, what we want to remember. You know, if they did a really nice job on a writing assignment, I toss it in there. I always save all math tests in there. And then what I do is, and I can use my OneNote for this, is that my kids each have a page on the OneNote where I detail what subjects that we're taking, or whatever they're responsible for. And then as we do things like, say, for field trips, like I have a section, whenever we take a field trip, I add that to their page. And then same thing with like extracurriculars or work experience. I just add that onto my OneNote. And then at the end of the year, I just kind of compile that up, and then I put that in their box. So I don't know if that answers the question. Like I said, I'm very spoiled. We don't have to really account to anybody, which is really a blessing.
Thank you. Second question here. How do you suggest managing longer seasons that interrupt your school schedule, such as having a new baby?
Mm-hmm. That's where I think the global planning goes on, and I make my sessions work for me, or my you know, terms work for me. That might be a time when we start school earlier so that we can take the break when the baby comes. I'm a huge fan of 40 days. I think that's really, really important. And so I really do protect that. And we really generally don't do any school during that time. Usually towards the end, the kids are getting a little squirrely and I might start to add things, but I try to be really mindful of that in planning. So that might mean that we're doing school at different times in the year. Um, I will say, we had a crisis kind of in our family a couple of years ago. Our baby was born in March, and my plan was that, we would take my 40 days and then we would finish May 1, we would finish out the school year. And unfortunately, she had some significant feeding issues. I really couldn't do anything but feed her. That was pretty much my life for about 4 months. And here I felt that incredible pressure to keep school rolling, when May 1st hit. If I had it to do again, I probably would have relieved myself of that pressure. But I was, as we all do as moms, trying to feel like we have to do it. I think if I had it to do again, I would have just kind of done some read alouds and made sure they had been reading, make sure we were praying, and, get some math in. So just kind of going back to basics in those times.
Thank you. Another question here. Any tips to fostering and encouraging homeschool environment? Our kids seem often opposed to each other, competitive and critical. My husband and I recognize this in ourselves, and we are wanting to stop this cycle in our family.
I think that's the gift of homeschooling, is that we're all together all the time, and we work out, all of our struggles together. I think that's where learning together can be a real blessing. I do have friends who have multiple kids who are in, virtual schools or, you know, they do, work boxes or whatever, and their kids are all doing different things. But I do think that as a family, when we're learning together, that does, encourage a more cooperative environment. Group projects, a couple years ago, we did, for our Christmas card, we did the Ghareeb Gazette. It was our little family newsletter, and we kind of tried to do it after our local newspaper. So we had the news section, which was kind of like what was going on in our whole family, and then we had the individual section, what individual people were doing, and then we had like something that we did for extracurricular to kind of talk about those sort of things. But we kind of all work together on it. So maybe thinking of things like that, where when we all get it done together, like it was something we were really proud of. The Ghareeb Gazette was something that we all contributed to. I don't know if something like that might be helpful, but I think the more we learn together and work together, we do foster that community atmosphere.
Thank you. One short question here was, can you repeat the name of Carol's blog?
Oh, the many hats of the Orthodox mom. And did I get that right, Carol? Give me a thumbs up if yeah, okay. Yeah, it's a great blog.
Okay, thank you. Another question here, is there a particular theory of learning you recommend, and is one more consistent with Orthodox principles, such as classical versus Charlotte Mason?
I am not a purist in any way. I just do what works, you know, and I think for different kids, I think different things work. And um, sometimes it has to do with mom too. I kind of lean Charlotte Mason, especially when my kids are younger, because I love to read and I love history and I love being outside. So my loves come out, and that's, you know, when my joy is in it, then they will find that joy. But I will say that kind of in my time of burnout, I was very blessed. God sent me a new woman in my life who is a classical minded person. And she started a classical study group, which has just truly been like, it is a great example to me of how God provides at just the right time, because I was really needing mentors at that stage of my life. I still need them, but I found them. I found them in this group. And reading a lot of the classical books, not actually not reading classical books, but books about classical education, it's really reminding me a lot more of what the heart of education is and what I really wanted to give my kids. I didn't want to give them information. I didn't want to get them ready for college. I really wanted to get them ready for the kingdom, as I said in the beginning. And so I think the classical, the more I learn about that, the more it's encouraging me to think to what the heart of what I really want to give my kids. So those are the two approaches that I'm spending more time with, but mostly I'm just doing what works at the time.
Hmm. Thank you. The question here, did any of your kids go to public school or asked to go to public school, particularly as teenagers?
My children, we've homeschooled all the way through. We have had kids, mostly not when you know, they've been a part of the decision. When we hit high school, we really chose again, whether we were going to do this again. I thought it was important to reevaluate. We've had kids express to us that they wish that they had had moments in school or whatever, but for the most part, even when when the distance comes out, um, over time, they look back and say, yeah, that was a blessing. I'm really glad it went the way it did. Our oldest did go to the public school for just one class. It was a way that we could get him to be able to take classes at the community college his senior year. It was just like an extracurricular class. And I guess that is, we did do, our oldest two so far have done classes at the community college their senior year. It's just kind of a nice bridge for us that we found, of just kind of go out and try it, but I'm here to support you, you know, with your
Mm.
questions and in your adjustment.
So maybe a follow-up then with middle school and high school in mind. What kinds of material classes have you used? Have you utilized online classes as well for them?
We haven't used a whole lot of online class. I will give a huge plug for the St. Raphael catechism classes. Absolutely love those. They have been such a blessing for our children. First of all, just the content is fabulous, but also the community that is formed within the students. We've just been really, really impressed with that. So any of our online dollars, that's where they're going. So we haven't used a lot of online. I've been a big fan of, you know, like we use Saxon for math, and that has videos that go through it and things like that.
Hmm. Thank you. Another question here. Do you have any resources or books that you recommend for families just starting out?
Um, Honestly, I can't think of anything off the top of my head. I do really love being on Facebook. There's a couple of groups for Orthodox homeschoolers, and I know that that's a great place to just get encouragement and to share ideas. But as far as, I guess one book I really did love was Teaching from Rest. That gave me a lot of great ideas. I will say I felt that maybe she didn't have any high schoolers, so her perspective might be a little different. You know, high school is a whole different bird, but that was a great book. I really did enjoy that.
So we have a couple of questions here on the same topic in regards to post-high school. Did
Mhm.
your graduates go on to college? If so, what do you think prepared them? Or what else do you think would have helped prepare them? And then questions in regards to pathway to higher education, community college, dual enrollment, those kinds of things.
So far, we've had kind of mixed results on that. Our oldest son, what I can say is both of our kids received admittance into college, and both of our kids so far have received reasonably good scholarships as part of that. And I do feel that for both of them, having to work independently and learn independently has been a huge blessing. Our oldest son decided to become a machinist. So he ended up he's working and then doing an apprenticeship and working on his associate's degree, and that may be changing. So his journey has been a little different. And this might be an important place to just kind of share. I had meant to and kind of, I guess, forgot about it. Our journey hasn't been perfect. And I think that's really important to share. And I regret that I didn't earlier. We've experienced rebellion as part of homeschooling, and that's disappointing and really hard to bear. But I think that for us, it made us stop and think, do we still want to take this path? Like, does this work? And I think the answer is definitely yes. Like, when I look back, there was no other way that I could definitely have filled our children with all of this Orthodox way of life and include them in that to the fullness for as long as we were able to. And I think also just being able to say for myself, I have grown and I have, hopefully become more of what God wants me to be in being a part of this journey. So it's not perfect. And I think that's really important to note, but it is truly a path to holiness. For our daughter, I've heard very often in her saying, like, I'm so glad that that I know how to study on my own. I'm so glad that I know how to find resources on my own, and that independence that they were given is definitely for both of them. I've heard that in classes that they feel confident, and they've both done very well working with professors and that sort of thing. I don't know if that helps answer that question.
Yes, thanks, Vicki. There's a couple of comments here in regards to the curriculum that you had suggested, the Children's Garden of the Theotokos, that was helpful. I don't know if you want to say any more about that. What did you find meaningful about it? How could it be helpful to others?
Oh, I love the Children's Garden of the Theotokos. I think I was one of the original purchasers of it back in the day, and my book is so beat up, but I love it because there is a lot of element for younger children, but it has set tones for our family that we rely on every single year through the liturgical year. So it's definitely, and the songs that we sing for the days of the week to remember what we're commemorating, we still sing those every day. Like, that's, even when you're in high school, you're still singing about the angels on Monday. That's just part of our family routine.
Let's see. Any other questions? There's lots of good discussion based on what you're saying here. And what was can you say the name of the book one more time, that curriculum?
That was called The Children's Garden of the Theotokos.
Okay. Here's a tough question. How do you deal with rebellion, and what materials do you use for high school? So two-part question.
Okay. Yeah, I'll start with the easy one. As far as materials for high school, I got really good advice from a friend of mine when I was trying to discern about whether we would do high school or not. Was I even capable? I'm trained to be a preschool teacher. That's my background. So preschool special ed's my game, but high school was really scary to me, especially math and science and all of that. But she gave me the advice that don't worry about homeschooling high school. Just do the next thing, which is really good advice for anything. But she says that, just worry about ninth grade and do ninth grade, and then worry about 10th grade and just keep going that direction. And so I really tried to follow that advice. And in doing that, it really did release my anxiety. I found that, for math or whatever, we just did the next thing. And we kept in mind on what the Michigan regulations were for graduation, and just kind of followed that as our guide. And there's just so many materials out there, and don't be afraid to change. I thought I had the greatest program for biology for my third child. I thought it matched his mind perfectly. I was really excited about it. He hated it. It was awful. So we changed partway through the year. We went back to what I had used before, and I didn't think it was that great, but we got it done, and that was what he wanted to do. So not being afraid to switch gears if you have to. As far as rebellion, I don't know. I don't know what the best way to handle it is. I'm feeling my way through it. I think the best advice that I've been given as I struggle through it is really just to lean on the Theotokos, just keep praying and really trusting that, you know, God loves your children even more than you do, even though that's so hard to imagine, and that he will not stop, you know, pursuing them. And so that's what I'm leaning on. That's how I'm dealing with rebellion. And I'm mainly, my husband and I both, you know, for one, we're a team, we stick together, but we're I think mainly just trying to keep reflecting the love of Christ in everything that we do, trying to just stay focused on what a Christian does and how we respond to people, and just kind of keep reflecting that. And that's, I don't know how it's going to work out, but I'm trying to trust.
Thank you. Yeah, we all are in that boat in some way or another, and that's reflected in the comments as well. Maybe one more question here, unless there are more that come in. A little bit of a longer paragraph. We're a little over 45 minutes from our parish too. We attend church regularly and our kids have friends at church, but we are on an island in our own community. How critical do you think it is to have other Orthodox peers, particularly thinking of middle school, teenage years? Do you have any practical advice as to how to help them in this area?
It's a huge struggle. It is really hard. And we actually don't have a lot of children in our parish. Our parish is kind of experiencing a little bit of a boom right now, and we're really excited about that. But my older children, that's a big part of their hurt, is that they really struggle to find Orthodox peers, and not for lack of trying. My husband and I are, you know, if there's some retreat going on somewhere, we're more than happy to drive them. We've been faithful to come to the homeschool conference. We only missed 1 year when our baby was sick. So we really trying to take advantage of the resources that we can. But I think that one of the things that we're finding with our younger high schoolers is, like I said, we really love the St. Raphael catechism classes. When they can find online friends, and I know people feel this way about camp as well, when they can find some friends and we allow for them to keep connecting, I think that's really important. It would be better, and my kids have said, I just want to go to a movie with my Orthodox friends. I just want to have them over at my house. I don't know how to do that. I'm constantly trying to find ways to do that right now. We're working at doing some things pan-Orthodox in our community. You know, I don't have the magic answer, and I know that's a hurt for a lot of people.
Mm. So we have, and Father Noah, if you're available, I want to bring you in on this. We've kind of touched a nerve, I think, a little bit on the rebellion piece, the struggle with that. And, you know, even reflecting on, as we maybe have teenagers who we're struggling with, what are we thinking about how we approach our youngers in light of that?
Mm-hmm.
You know, are there some lessons learned that we can at least try to implement? And then, Father, if you have some suggestions too on this whole issue of rebellion in those teenage years.
Yeah, I think that's very much probably the heart of most of what my husband and I talk about, is as it's not like we're just retiring from this. We're going back into battle again, so to speak. So I think so much of it is, for us, it's not external things. It's not, we should get them in this club, this activity, we need this better book they have to do. It's so much of it is just internal work of being there to walk the struggle with them and talk with them, and kind of highlighting ways that God is working in their life and being honest about how he's working in our life. I think it's just, it's something that you really can't, I wish that there was like a rule book or something to follow, but I don't think there is. I think it's just being willing to be there with the struggle. That's another book I absolutely love, is the Parenting Toward the Kingdom. That is a book that I pull out all the time and reread, because it's a foundational kind of piece in parenting. And I think that's one thing that we are learning more and more, is it's things have to change at the foundation, not superficial things.
Mm. Father Noah, I'm going to unmute you here for a second if you want to speak.
Yeah, so my oldest is nearly 20 and the youngest is nearly 2. And my oldest says that we were strict about all the wrong things
Mhm.
and relaxed about all the wrong things.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to see that. And so we're trying to be a little looser about some things that I think are big deals, but maybe really aren't that big of a deal. And you know, I guess the question in my mind, the issue that I've had, and the repentance that I've had to have has been, let me get to a little place here that's better. The repentance that I've had is that these children are not mine. And of course we know that intellectually, but do we really know that emotionally? And I think sometimes we hang on to them too much.
Mhm.
And we, at least this is the mistake that I've made. You know, I maybe love them too much, or, you know, not well enough, but too much. Not want them to make mistakes, you know, sheltering them too much. So to say from the beginning, I know that these are not my children. They're mine for a while to take care of. They're God's children. They're the King's children. And it's such a cliche to say that, but to really think that, to really feel that is very different. And so it's almost like you should have some teenagers living at your house before you have babies,
Mhm.
because then you really understand. Boy, it's not about them getting them to do the right thing, making them do the right thing. It's about them having the right attitude and building the right habits, knowing that they're going to be on their own soon. And whether or not you made them clean the room for the last 10 years, it's going to be up to that. You know, whether or not, all of these things. So to develop the right habit. And I think the big thing is communication. And communication is so tricky, especially if there's stress and busyness. You know, but to try to be open to communication. And sometimes my wife says I communicate a little too heavy. I'm always kind of on the deep end of the pool. And that's not always the most helpful. So I think the big thing, though, that Vicki, you mentioned, that you and your husband are a team, and I'm grateful that my wife and I are a team too. And sometimes to say, honey, you gotta, you know, lay off. Let me take care of this one. You know, let me take care of this one. But it's been such a blessing to be able to say, well, all these mistakes that we made, all these ideals that we thought were so important, they're actually not that big of a deal. It's just really the fundamentals that are the most important things.
Let me ask a follow-up question here to Vicki, and then we'll go back to Father Noah, and then maybe Father, you can close with a blessing. Maybe just, Vicki, a word to the moms and dads perhaps that are hurting. You know, their hearts are hurting because of where their children are. What word of encouragement would you give to us?
I would say I want it too. But I would say that you're not alone. You know, I think we often hear in homeschooling, we hear all the success stories. And I mean, I know that I heard it for years. I mean, if you do this and you do that, I mean, homeschoolers are, you know, they get the perfect ACT score, they get the full ride to college, and they're perfect in church. Like, they don't do rebellion. And so when it happened to us, I was like, oh my gosh, like, we're the only ones, and we failed. And I do still struggle with that. But recognizing that as I started to be open to sharing a little bit, every family is struggling and worried about their children in some way. And so once you recognize that, you become softer, you become and more, I don't know, looking for ways to support each other. And we do have such a wonderful community in homeschooling, because we all share that love of our children and that desire for them to find their ways to the kingdom. And so I think the biggest thing is just that you're not alone. And even when you feel alone, you know, there was a time when I was reaching out to people, you know, trying, like, what do you do when this happens? And everyone was kind of looking around like, I don't know, I never had this, you know. And I felt so very alone. I wasn't alone, because I have to always remember that God loves my children more than I do, and he is working for them. And even this moment of struggle that they're in can be used for good or will be used for good. And I have to trust that. And so that's kind of what I'm leaning on through all of this.
Thank you. Father Noah, I'll maybe switch that back over to you as well. Pitch that question to you?
Yeah, so the hope here, a couple things. I think homeschooling teenagers is the most frustrating thing in the world, because you see your sins not as, you know, little seedlings, but as mature trees. But it's so much better to see our own sins that way than to see society's sins. So my wife and I will often say, "Oh, this is terrible, you know, our sins are coming out of these children." But again, our sins are, thank God, our sins are not, you know, to the Hollywood level of drama and confusion that we see out there, that they would have had they gone someplace else. So there's that one thing. It's really painful for us. It makes us repent. It makes us understand. The other thing is that, you know, the greatest saints, some of the greatest saints had difficult lives, had very difficult lives. And it wasn't that they had perfect parents, but they had prayerful parents, or Mama Lakis would say had repentant parents. And, you know, I think of Saint Augustine and his mother, Saint Monica. She prayed for him, weeping for 17 years. And what it says about her when he was in his rebellious stage, it says that she preached to him never. She spoke rarely. She wept often, and she prayed without ceasing. And now he became one of the greatest saints of Western Europe. So sometimes I think that the children that are the hardest to handle are the ones that actually have the kind of the most potential. They're the ones that they just can't stand being, you know, sat upon or told what to do, because they're going to do great things, and we almost have to not stand in their way. We have to let them learn their lessons, but be there to help them pick up the pieces. And one of the things I've learned early on, and we're trying to do this now, this is back to the last question, how would you parent your younger children now based on knowing the teenager thing, is don't, you know, help the children get up, but don't actually pick them up from their mistakes. Don't clean up their mistakes, but help them clean up their mistakes. For example, for a 1-year-old, that means if they fall down, you know, you could kind of pat them, but don't necessarily scoop them up every time. You know, for a 15-year-old, that means, you know, there's going to be consequences if they don't clean the room. For a 17 or 18-year-old, that means, you know, if their license goes out of expiration, then they can't drive. You know, you don't have to remind them, or you can remind them once. You know, or you don't do their taxes for them. You tell them, I'm happy to do your taxes, and you're working on them until April 13th, and then after that, you're on your own. Let them learn those lessons now. And eventually, they're going to have to learn those lessons later, and it's going to hurt. But then, you know, even St. Mary of Egypt, you know, how broken of a home did she come from? It's hard to imagine the brokenness of her home. But it's even harder to imagine the joy of heaven in her repentance. And then every year we celebrate her life with such a glory and such sweetness. So they are God's children, and our job is to kind of get them going in the right direction, kind of give them a nostalgia, the smell of paradise, so that as they sniff their way through the world, they'll be able to make their way and say, "Ooh, that it looks nice, but it doesn't smell good. You know, I'm not going there. I'm going to keep going because, you know, maybe my parents weren't perfect. Maybe my family had some dysfunction, but I did understand love. I did understand forgiveness. I did understand peace and joy and community." I think I could go on and on, but yeah, but I shouldn't.
Thank you for those words, both you and Vicki.